Hello and welcome to the next episode of The World According to Luke. My guest today is John Morton, an American living in Poland who wants to become a Polish citizen. Hello, John. Tell me, please, why would you like to choose Polish citizenship?
This has been more or less my home for the past 20, 25 years. I've been coming and going, using Poland not only as my home base, but as my real home. My wonderful wife is here. Her extended family is also here in beautiful downtown Słupsk, and I would dearly love to represent the finest of Polish tradition and history and finest people that have lived historically in Poland, and I could do that with citizenship. The passport would be great to have because it allows me more access to countries that would be hard to get into with an American passport. Yes, and I would like to participate in civic duties with proper civic courage, such as voting or resistance when that needs to come about. So, yes, I would like to not be a permanent resident any longer, which is partial citizenship, and I'm glad for that privilege. However, I do believe it's my earnest responsibility and duty to move on and to be a dual citizen of the United States and of Poland and take on the ethical and moral demands that are placed on me in both countries. And I am seeing, as I have said to my friends and to my students a number of times, the Americanization of Poland. And that disturbs me, troubles me very deeply. As a citizen, I feel I could do more about attempting to arrest that juggernaut of culture and of economy and militarization that's taking place here. And yes, I feel like with the things that I mentioned, an acquisition of the language is key to addressing that as well. So it involves responsibilities and duties that are not just material or earthly, but type of mental and spiritual demand as well. So, yes, if it's there, if it's available, then I'll make a stab at it. Yeah.
How come that Americanization of Poland bothers you? What are the signs that it's not good for local people?
Mm-hmm. Studied Polish history and would by no means say that I'm an expert on it. However, I've got a general overview of it, and I've seen just how colorful it is and familiar with the 16th century, the golden century, and how tolerant and how full of respect and kindness Poland can be to foreigners. And now that Poland has allowed America entry into its boundaries, I have seen that there's been almost a rapaciousness that would reflect avarice and greed beyond the scale of even America at times, and that disturbs me. And this anti-immigrant notion that also has been coming from the West for a long time. America's actions at the border, its activities internationally in creating and generating refugees, who are attempting to flee the ruins of their own land, ruined by NATO, led by the United States. Poland now being almost a willing partner of that participation in slaughters and massacres and shock and awes in different places and around the world. And so it's that level of violence and participation in violence and guilt that I would truly try to, and have tried to, hinder and at least make people responsible for intellectually and in the sense of consciousness and awareness for the actions that they are taking, and ask them, bring up the notion of are we really creating a circular firing squad here? In the Old Testament, there's many words about seeking the peace of the city, and are we taking actions that are doing that, or are we simply just blaming other people for the troubles that we ourselves have initiated? And yes, so it's not just Ukraine and Ukraine's the unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. Of course, I mean, naturally everybody understands that Putin is a snake in the grass and a gangster of the highest order, and he's really a blast furnace of agony and pain. That's understood. What is not understood is that American history reflects the same type of behavior. The unprovoked invasion of Iraq is never mentioned. The unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is. Why is that? And that is because American corporations have control of the media, and they can interpret the facts and create their own narrative as they wish, simply because they want to sell more arms and more oil and gas. And you can trust me, I'm coming from Colorado Springs, Colorado, where Lockheed Martin is one of the great arms manufacturers in America, and they are dancing in the hallways at the profits that they are making. And that's open. You can research that. That's there. There's the Freedom of Information Act, and find out how much money these major arms manufacturers such as Raytheon, which built nearby Renjikovo, and Shell Oil, and how the banks, Wall Street, how much they're making from this war. And it's in the interest of the United States to continue to block talks and negotiations, to, as Seymour Hersh just recently wrote in a very powerful article, to blow up Nord Stream 2, to sabotage negotiations and cooperation between Russia and Germany. So, yes, and to have Poland sit back and take a quietist, criminal quietist view toward American actions overseas, as well as domestically, or become an active partner in American aggression abroad, hostilities in Afghanistan and in Yemen, is simply too much for any human being, and for Christians, for Catholics, for evangelicals to either not say anything at all or to openly advocate for not only the status quo, but for even greater aggression against these people who, for some reason, are viewed by the West as if they were cockroaches and vermin, insects, completely superfluous. And spent time in India. I spend almost every summer in India, and I see the upper caste treating the lower caste Dalits as just as though those things that I just mentioned. And there is some similarity and some proximity to the behavior of America overseas toward the Southern Hemisphere. And as I believe, a sincere Christian and committed one, that I have to speak up and I have to act according to the faith and according to the to my conscience and according to history and to the command of duty that I have been given. And to not acknowledge that or to not do anything about it is not just criminal, but it is, to bring up a controversial word, it is Antichrist. When there is that type of horror going on and it is unacknowledged or not confronted, whether it's horror against others or against the planet, our creation, if it's against people in India who are not permitted access to vaccines, or if it's against the anti-democratic moves that are being taken by countries such as Hungary, in some cases Poland as well, then that's Antichrist behavior. And for the church to not be prophetic about that, and to not write of it or speak of it in the sermons, to not have, instead of simply processions marking certain holidays, but processions of peace building and peacemaking and saving Mother Earth, God's own creation. To not have them do that is an existential sin, and I have to call that out as one who's been trained as a Christian, who's been a Christian through seminary and have lived in different parts of the world among the poorest of the poor, not just in India but in Yemen and in Sudan, in the slums of Cairo, and among Palestinians victimized by Israelis, and in Guatemala during the Civil War, the early 90s, trying to get kids off the street and into orphanages and or being adopted. My experience teaches me that the Imago Dei, which is Latin, of course, for the image of God, is a reality. And that means no hatred of anyone, anytime, anywhere. And that when Jesus indicates by his demand that it's not just that we are told not to kill. We are told in the same sentence not to hate, and that has led over the years, particularly in my early 20s, to the conclusion that radical pacifism, and by radical I mean the core, the roots of pacifism, which are restless, as Luther would say, a restlessness to act responsibly with civic courage, as Bonhoeffer would say, and Niemöller, in favor of life, to attempt to save these young boys from Texas, killing young boys from Saigon, and in the same sense, young boys from Moscow, killing young boys from Kiev, who really have no understanding of what precisely they are doing. One of the things that I often think about when I'm at the edge of these war zones is if this young man who's now dying in a hospital because he's had his leg blown off by a mine or a mortar, if that young man's bleeding out were to be broadcast, people would, through some live stream, people would say how grotesque and how horrifying that is, and how beyond the pale that type of film is to show that, and they would feel so repulsed by it, they would want either the film to end or what caused that boy's bleeding out to end. And I believe most people, being decent as they are, would simply be appalled at how that boy came to be in that situation. What were the causes? What were the reasons? What were the roots? And why wasn't this stopped? And the Bible's really quite clear on what happens when we, meaning you and I, allow the rich to do what they want with the poor. And it comes out with these examples of what happens when the rich are allowed to do what they will with the poor. And we can see the consequences of that right now in this present age. And so, yes, I am a radical pacifist because I am a Christian. And is it really radical? Is it truly radical to want to protect the lives of civilians, of children, of grandmothers and grandfathers, and young boys and mothers and fathers, and bakers and teachers and doctors and clerical workers and janitors and waiters and waitresses? Is that so radical to want people to simply live? And that's the question that's posed. It's usually used in the abortion argument. The question is, choose life that you and your descendants may live. Well, that applies not only to children. It applies to each and every part of life. So it's not just a pro-life movement. It's a whole life movement. We're addressing, as those of us who Thomas Kempe in his imitation of Christ are actually seeking to be the imitation of Christ, to address this as closely as possible as Christ would do. And the greater cloud of witnesses, as St. Paul mentioned. And if the institutional church wants to follow, it is free to do so. It usually has historically, whenever there's been a grassroots movement of remorse and confession and character transformation, then the established church, the conformist church, which dominates the world sorrowfully and sadly, will want to perhaps change its ways, or at least move in the direction of greater life, of greater truth, of purity and humility and protecting a certain standard of living and of human rights and civil rights. And that's what we are arguing for as radical Christians. It's not just salvation in a future heaven, which we believe in. It's salvation and goodness and tender mercies and ultimately love that we're arguing for on earth. It's not simply a joy in some other place called heaven, which we, again, affirm. It's here and now. And Kierkegaard, in his works, his parables, says this time and again, we're being offered this. We're being offered the palace, and instead we choose to live in a dingy, in a dirty attic. And that's our choice. And so we can also choose, as people have historically, to not live in the dirty, dingy attic, but to come out of the attic and make moves toward what is lovely and what is light and what is hope. And there is that happening. Certain people in Poland who have sued the government for not protecting the clean air and the water and the land and the forest. There's light and there's love in that, and it helps. It's encouraging. It's inspiring. And when I was in the 80s, I was in my early 20s and watching from the United States Europeans rising up against the impending ominous threat of thermonuclear war. Reagan making his threats, and Bortsov and the Russians responding, and Europeans saying, no, we're not going to let this happen. And so the treaties grew out of and emerged out of those peace movements, and they brought Gorbachev and Reagan together, and that's what led to the START Treaty. And now that START Treaty, to the horror of many of us who have worked for that treaty and the elimination of nuclear arms, is probably going to go by the way, with Putin mentioning that he doesn't want to sign on anymore. He wants to simply abandon it. And in a sense, I mean, there's no excuse again for that type of statement and that type of abandonment of a decent, not great, but a decent treaty. There's no reason for it. Yet, prior to that, Bush got rid of the ABM treaty, and then Trump got rid of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and the Open Skies Treaty. Those are all provocations, and now it's led to yet another arms race. And so those of us who grew up in the 60s are having to relive the night terrors that we lived through with Kennedy almost bringing us to the point of complete annihilation. And as kids, many of us will recall sitting next to the window in the heater, on the heater in the morning, and our parents arguing whether or not we should build a bomb shelter downstairs. All of those things are coming back. And for those of us who are sincere in our evangelical beliefs, we are back on our knees again, praying for peacemaking, for peace builders, and for peacekeepers, beginning with ourselves to act and to speak out and to face whatever consequences may come, and even face results that are never brought about, the results of our better dreams for humanity and for the trilogy of what's good and what's beautiful and what's true. We may not have the type of results that we yearn for. We may just be shoved aside, and the worst may occur, God forbid. Yet we're prepared for that too, because we're not results oriented. We're character oriented, and in a sense, we care deeply, so deeply about that poor widow who lives across town that doesn't make ends meet because the city has cut taxes for her. In a sense, we deeply care about her, but in another sense, we cannot care about people that are hell bent on Sigmund Freud, living out Sigmund Freud's death wish, and he wrote his work on the psychology of death prior to Hitler's invasion of Poland, and he could see it coming, and he spoke of this battle between Eros and Thanatos, the life wish, and the death wish, and how those two are in perpetual clash, and just like, as we know, that death drive did play itself out in Germany, and we were warned, and we were warned repeatedly, not just by Freud, but by theologians who were there, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Niemöller, as I mentioned, and Karl Barth, and others said what they needed to say, and were ignored throughout Europe and the United States. The United States did play a role in not doing enough in accepting victims of the Holocaust. Even in 1934, there was enough intelligence arriving in America to know what was about to occur in Germany, and yet nothing happened there. There were certain pastors and preachers and prophets in the United States that take Eugene Debs, who was a great labor leader and also a preacher of sorts, but focused on the rights of workers. He himself was a radical pacifist and refused to accept Woodrow Wilson's call for hatred of the Hun, of the German. And Wilson hated him for that and kept him in prison even after the war ended. It's recrimination and revenge. And so we understand Debs, that he did not care about results. For him, it was to get the message out. And the response was, well, get rid of the messenger. That's historically been the way things have gone. So, yeah.
how one can become a radical pacifist, and what was your way towards it?
Yeah. For me, it was a natural progression, Stash. I converted to Christianity at a very young age, at the age of 21. And
so you weren't a Christian before, yes?
I was nominally one. Like most Christians around the world, they're perhaps a quarter serious, half serious at best. They care about personal morality and responsibility. They accept the interpretation and the spin on evangelicals just being concerned about gay marriage and abortion and guns, and they stop with that. And they, of course, love their families. And what they don't see is the Bible's call to look at the bigger picture. And I myself was like that at the age of 21. And then I went through what I call my second conversion at the age of 26 when I met and spoke with an inner city Christian worker that was involved in a house church there in Washington, D.C. And he not only cared about his personal salvation, his private morality, he cared about making society a better place to live and the world a place where truth could be spoken of and there could be real critical thinking and legitimate democracies such as Socrates spoke of. And there he was, right in the center of Washington, D.C., at the time, the criminal capital of the United States, a couple miles away from the White House, and living out the Gospels and living in the way Pope John the 23rd called for in his Vatican II, where he called for a revival of the Gospels, a return to the Gospels, and had priests and sisters and lay people go to the countryside in not just South America, but all over the world, and be examples and teach reading and writing and skills and have Bible studies and look at practical ways of living out Christianity personally and privately and how impacting the world is also an important part of being a Christian. So yes, all of those elements came together, and I could see that this man was dead serious and living according to so many individuals and reformists and activists through the centuries have lived, and they have come up against a church that has been battling them because they've aligned themselves with power and wealth, the same power and wealth that has been what St. Paul calls the principalities and powers of the world. That's what the established church has done. They have linked themselves, they've married themselves to power and wealth. And it's what we've seen since the 3rd century when Constantine made that decision to forsake the dictates of the early church and make Christianity the religion of the empire. So the cross, instead of being a symbol of suffering, suddenly became a symbol of military power and victory. And the persecuted turned overnight into persecutors. And for many Christians at the time, at the period of that transformation, they simply couldn't handle it anymore, and they fled to the deserts as monks and monastics, and refused to be a part of that marriage between church and state. So they understood that was a massive compromise, and that compromise naturally led to Christians taking up the sword. Whereas for the first 3 centuries of the church's life, Christians were forbidden from doing that, and they were martyred for it. If they converted in the Roman army, they were taken away and executed. It wasn't because they were forced to worship Roman idols that they resisted. They resisted because they were suddenly, as a result of their conversion, radical pacifists. They were imitating Christ in his many expressions, both verbal and in fact, his nonviolence and his willingness to not only love his neighbor, but to love his enemy. Of course, he had moments where he went absolutely wild, but it was never against people. It was always against things. When he went into the temple and overturned the treasury and the tables there and let the birds fly, the pigeons who were going to be sacrificed, that was an act of love. He didn't hurt anybody. He was protecting the integrity and the authority, the credibility, the trustworthiness, the reliability of the church. And we today can learn from that we are never to assault or attack or insult individuals. However, we have to confront those principalities and powers, those forces that are unseen and demonic, that have taken over people's lives and caused them to be addicted, perhaps even against their own will. I mean, it's hard to do this because you've got so many CEOs across America that are filthy rich and can't look themselves in the mirror without congratulating themselves for creating so many jobs, yet are doing so much damage to the planet and to surroundings and to people across the United States. It's hard, really hard, to like these people. In fact, I don't. Dr. King says you don't have to like these people, but you have to love them, and that's a battle. That's a dilemma for many of us. We don't like the fact that politicians or big businessmen are attempting to take over the press and the courts in Poland. Yet we still have to pray for them, and we have to act in their best interests. And if that means blocking a road, if it means striking, if it means urging moratoriums or sit-ins and disruption, then that's what it means, because that too is an act of love. We're forcing people to look at themselves after having looked at ourselves first. And
shouldn't radical pacifism be over national and over religious? Is it open for
Yes.
everyone
Yes.
in the modern world?
No doubt. ethically, there have been many throughout history that have not been religious, that have not called themselves Buddhist or Hindu or Shinto or anything at all. I mean, there's stories of African missionaries who have not been missionaries. They've simply been humanitarians and gone into deep, dark places of danger, and have sought to protect people simply for the sake of protecting people. And yes, I mean, ethically, there's much history behind that. And I myself, I'm in sympathy with these people because they are showing a type of strength and wisdom, bravery that most people do not show. They're aware of the consequences just like I am. The thing is that it's speaking now as a Christian, it's really hard, almost impossible, I believe, for one who is not religiously based, religiously, ethically based, to love the enemy as the enemy needs to be loved, and to do things for the enemy, to make sacrifices for the enemy, to show the enemy that they are truly loved in a way that transforms the individual. I mean, it's just hard to talk with people that you dislike. There's a certain tone of voice and body language that you give out that communicates the type of love that I believe that God has for our enemies, and I certainly respect and I admire those that don't have that religious root planted in them, and I bid them all the best. I believe that there are people that seek for what's good and beautiful and true, and if they do, they will end up with a certain individual from Nazareth, because he's just, it's almost impossible to get around him. Historically, there's more history of his life and of his words than there is for Julius Caesar, and read the classical writers and authors, and they keep bringing him up again and again and again, and they don't always acknowledge him as a God or Lord or Savior the way that Christians do, but they have to acknowledge his historicity. And so,
but why Jesus Christ can be universal? I think everybody has got their own kind of perspective on him and of his teachings, and that's why you have like thousands of different branches of Christianity, and it causes more and more divisions. I believe that you cannot just kind of squeeze the universal message and unite around it. We always have people who coming and say, "Oh, we make you a better world. We make you utopia," and they get to power, whether it's in church or in a state, and they do exactly as the previous governments. Why? How can it be changed? Because there is only hope in changing the system. Do you think it can be done within the system, or it has to be kind of destroyed and built over one more time, just starting from scratch?
There's evidence for revolutionary faith in action inside and outside of the church, much is contingent upon how we answer the question that Paul asked in the book of Galatians: is Christ divided? Is Christ divided? And if we answer that question by embracing those of other Christian customs and traditions, then yes, we are part of New Testament Christianity. However, if we stand on, as Kierkegaard put it, stand on traveling the train of triviality, then we are not going to make any difference at all. And I had to learn that the hard way. As an American Christian Protestant, I was taught that Catholicism was representative of Dante's 9 circles of hell, and slowly and certainly over the years, I've met some wonderful Catholic people, some brothers and sisters who are my friends for life, and it even came to the point where I was living in Aswan, Egypt, assisting a small Catholic chapel there with immigrants and Muslims that were just on the bottom rung of Islam. And Luis, who happened to be a priest from Italy, was leading the Mass, and he had just experienced an emotional breakdown, and he was recovering from that. And I was there in the congregation, and just prior to the Mass, he motioned to me, and he brought me over to himself, and he said, "John, would you mind leading the Mass?" And I had never, as a Protestant pastor with some experience, led a Catholic Mass before. And I had some idea as to how that was to go about. I didn't really think about what the substance meant in terms of bread and wine. I didn't really care, because Jesus doesn't really care about it. He doesn't say interpret it. He just says take it and eat and drink. There's no spin that Jesus puts on it, and I understood that at the time. To be asked by him, this priest, long-standing and very much respected there in the slums of Aswan, Egypt, for him to ask me to do that was such an act of kindness and tolerance and ecumenicism that I was deeply affected by that. And suddenly I had a surge, a tsunami is more like it, a tsunami of feeling for these Catholic brothers and sisters in the third world, particularly, who have reflected self-sacrifice and self-giving and self-denial, self-renunciation to the extent that they have. And yes, I have come almost full circle on that. And if people want to speak in a tongue language in a Pentecostal church, they believe that there's biblical justification for that. That's not a hill I want to stand on and fight. I mean, I'll be in conflict with those who say that, well, the world is not so bad as you make it out to be. It's not as sinful. It's not as sorrowful, and it's not as complicated as you make it out to be. These are people that are just not being moral individuals or Christians. What they need to understand is that we're at a point in time historically where the world is at risk, very serious risk of going by the way. I'm not talking about the entire elimination of humanity, and I am not a rapturist in that sense. And to use a theological word, an eschatologist who believes that the world is coming to an end and a doomsayer. None of that is in the New Testament. The point I'm trying to make is that organized human life is in danger, and it could happen either through another pandemic. We're taking a look. Some of us who believe that we need to have a Bible and a newspaper next to us in the morning. Some of us who believe that are concerned about H5N1 as avian bird flu as a possible pandemic candidate. We're looking at the probability of either intentional or accidental nuclear war. We're looking at.
Do you know how they call it now? All these possibilities that the world can be disturbed, the event, and people from big tech, they are preparing, building some kind of underground shelters for themselves.
Yes. Rushkoff's work on the escapist mentality of the filthy rich is quite revealing. He stumbled into this meeting of corporate leaders and thinking that they were going to ask him about technology. Instead, they began asking him how they could survive just what you brought up, and that would be the event. And he ended up talking to them about what had to be done with a kind of wry smile on his face, knowing that later on he was going to report on these people who are at the same time destroying the world, wanting to escape from the very world that they are destroying. And
what would you do to change the situation? How it can be changed now? Because I think since the start of Christianity, we live in like a constant time of apocalypse, because people have been hated each other since the start, and you always have some dates and moments that kind of point the possibility of the end of the world, whether it's medieval times and plague or some nuclear bomb. How could we change the direction of this river that constantly floods all the land and all the people's mind?
Certainly. In India, you see such despair and profound desperation, such hunger and agony and suicides. You look at it from that perspective, from only the perspective of darkness and death and evil and the macabre. And then you go behind the scenes, behind what the outward appearance is, and you find people such as farmers who have realized what's happening and have said enough is enough. We've lost too many of our friends through suicide or through plague. We're going to organize, and we're going to indicate to the Indian government that we are not going to work anymore until they either enforce the law or create laws that are just and fair. So thousands upon thousands of farmers descended upon Delhi and Mumbai and Calcutta and demanded action. That's one way of doing it. I as an individual, I have ways that I feel comfortable with. I'm not a great organizer. I prefer speaking on the streets in the United States. I haven't done it yet in Poland. Maybe someday if my Polish should ever develop to kind of B2 level, let's say.
You speaking out now as well?
Yeah. I'm working. Pracuję. To codzienna gramatyka. To jest taki wymagająca realność dla mnie, że to nie wiem, jakie różnice pomiędzy dopełniać i ten inne przypadki są. No, teraz dają sobie radę. To nie jest wystarczy. Jak chcę rozmawiać o ten tematy, że rozmawialiśmy nawet po polsku. To jest taki moja... jestem niepełnosprawny z język i ja chcę być zdolność i to jest moja cel i to Thomas Aquinas, ten klasyczny pisarz, on pisał, że musimy kochać nasze Bóg i nasze myślenie, nasza mentalność przed Bogiem jest ważna, tak jak duch, tak jak serce, tak nasze ciało. Musimy kochać Bóg przez nasz mózg też. I dlatego to jest jeden powód, że ja uczę się co dzień polskiego języka.
Idzie ci bardzo dobrze, John. Why won't we stop now and we definitely come back to this conversation. I think we are running out of the time that was given to us by Zeppelin. Thank you very much for coming and radical pacifism. We may leave some good books or organizations in the comments so people can check it and kind of start investigating the topic, as I think it's a niche that should be spreaded all over the world. That's my dream as well.
So be it, Stash, and I am just staring at my coffee, John Morton style, and longing for that sip before I head out into the night. And I want to say how grateful I am for this very stimulating talk that we've had. And before I go to bed tonight, I will get on my knees and thank Providence and governance for that opportunity and for what we've discussed tonight, the higher ideals, what we've discussed tonight, that they be realized sooner the better.
You don't have this kind of conversation very often in a modern world.
Not with preschoolers here in Poland. That's got a way to go.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
And see you again.
Okay.